Hi everyone. Yes, I am wearing a mask because I am in an HPE office and we have a policy saying I should be wearing a mask at all time. Anyway, so welcome to this session. This is an introduction to the HPE OneView REST API. So in this session, we are going to use two programming languages, PowerShell and Python, to work with the OneView API. So first we'll get familiar with the OneView PowerShell module and a few API things, and then we'll do some simple work, establish an authenticated session with HPE OneView, look at some commands to read from OneView, and finally create a new server profile from a server profile template. And then we'll switch to Python and do essentially the same, so authenticate to a OneView appliance, use some commands to read from OneView, and create a new server profile from a template. This will be delivered to a Jupyter notebook, and you can follow along what I will be doing using your own system, connecting to our Jupyter instance. So this is where you should point your browser to. I have the link here on the screen, https://notebooks.hpedev.io. And you should be presented with a login screen. This is where you will need to input your student ID that Frederic or Patrick can assign to you, like Frederic said. And the password is also what you have on the screens, Stu, lowercase, Disco, uppercase, 2020. So make a note of that. And with that, I'll switch my screen to that login screen. I'll wait maybe a minute until everyone should be there. So I'll be using student 201. Nobody else should be using that student ID, and password, like I said, to Disco 2020. Okay, I'll assume everyone who wants to follow along is there more or less, or pretty close. So I'll proceed. I click sign in. I'm in my Jupyter environment where I have a list of notebooks here on the left. I start with the README first, double click to open it. And there's a little introduction. So if you don't know what REST is, I put a link here to the Wikipedia article talking about it. It's basically a simple style of API that uses HTTP and HTTP verbs like post, get, put, patch, and delete to interact with, in this case, an appliance, an HPE OneView appliance. So we're going to start with the first lab, which is with PowerShell. So you can click the link here to lab 1 or click this notebook here, one of the API PowerShell notebook. That's the same thing. It will take you here. And so to use the API, you can do your own programming and build HTTP requests on your own, of course. That's perfectly doable. But we also offer multiple libraries for different languages that will handle the details of a REST request for you and let you concentrate on the resources you want to manage. So here we're going to use first the PowerShell module that is available on the PowerShell gallery. It's compatible with PowerShell Core, meaning it can work on different platforms. It's not just a Windows thing anymore. PowerShell can also run on macOS and Linux. And in fact, in this environment you're running here, it's running on a Linux system. That's where we are running our Jupyter Hub. So to start in a PowerShell session, you first need to import the module after it has been installed. If you go to the first code cell here and click this little arrow here, if you're not familiar with Jupyter, that's how you execute the code in a cell. That's going to display some text, which is in fact new with this version of OneView. It's a warning that is basically saying that soon HPE OneView will be renamed to HPE OneView. So the name of the module and the name of the commandlets we are going to see are going to change in a future version, and that will make us have to change our scripts to use the new naming. But for now, this is just a warning. Then this command here is going to list all the commands that are implemented in this module. So if I do a get command -module HP OneView.520, I get all the commands. So you see they all follow the same naming pattern, which is a verb, then a dash, then HPOV, soon to be renamed to just OV, and then the resource that this command is acting on. So for example, to add a SAN manager, you would use this commandlet here, add HPOV SAN manager. Then you have a bunch of different verbs, convert, disable, enable, get. On that, the list is pretty long. This is all the commands used to read resources from a OneView appliance. Then new, that's to create a new resource. So for example, when you want to add a new license, you would use that command, or when you want to add a new network, you would use new HPOV network, etc. Then you have remove, which is the opposite of new, to remove a resource or to remove a network you created previously. You would use remove HPOV network, etc. Then there are a few sets to modify an existing resource, etc. So now we're going to define the IP address of the appliance we are going to use. So this appliance is running already. It's a DCS appliance, like we call them, meaning it's a OneView embedded with some code that simulates hardware. I just run that. And then I'm ready to connect to my OneView appliance. With this command, connect HPOV MGMT -host name, I pass the IP address in the $appliance variable I just set in the previous cell. Username administrator, password. This is a lab environment, so we don't use strong passwords. And there you go. We have a connection, successful connection. And now let's look at what this connection did, in fact. If I run this cell, and I get this variable, global connected sessions.session ID. That's in fact the token that was returned by the login call to the REST API. And I display it here with $token. That's the value of my token. So that's the value of my authentication token. And that's going to be reused throughout the session to let OneView know that I am an authenticated user for this session. And in fact, you can use this token to access the REST API without using the PowerShell library. For example, here we're going to use curl to make a simple request, HTTPS $appliance, that's still the IP address of our OneView appliance, /rest/network sets. I want to do get on that resource. That means list the network sets that are configured on this appliance. And I add a header for which the name is off, and the value is the token I just got. So let's execute that. And I get a successful response with some JSON data showing how many network sets I have on this appliance. In fact, I have just one. See here the members, it's an array with just one member. The name of the network set is here, prod, and these are the URIs of the 4 networks included in this network sets. Now what happens if I do the same request without the auth header? So go back here, I had this -h, and this is the same command without this -h option. Well, I get an authorization missing error. That makes sense since I didn't prove I was authenticated to the OneView appliance. OneView rejected the request. And now, in fact, that request can be done with a commandlet from the PowerShell module for OneView. And that's the name of the commandlet, get HPE network set. So let's run that. And that gives me a nice output with the name of the network set, some bandwidth parameters, and the names of the 4 networks included in that network set. And in fact, just out of curiosity, we are going to run that same command with the verbose switch. So you can do that on your own. You can edit code live in cells in Jupyter. That's one of the nice things with this environment. So if I rerun that command with a verbose switch, I'm going to get a lot more output suddenly. And that shows you everything the PowerShell module does in the background to help with working with the OneView API. So just to get that fairly simple output we had before with 1 network set and 4 networks in it, in fact, it had to do a number of calls. So first it got to read the network set in question with a get on the index and category network set. And a get on the network set itself. It's here with the unique ID of the network set. And in the JSON, you're going to get the URI of the 4 Ethernet networks. So that's pretty much the output we got in the curl command just before. But in order to provide a more human readable output, in fact, the PowerShell module is going also to read each of these networks. So for example, here I do a get on REST Ethernet networks and then the UID of one of the networks that it got from this call here. And that's going to give, in particular, the name of the network, which is here, name prod 1101. It's going to do that for each of the networks included in the network sets. I'm going to have 4 calls networks just to finally be able to display something like this with the name of the network set and the names instead of the URIs of each network in the network set. That's just to illustrate that the PowerShell module is just here to help and is doing quite a bit of work in the background that you don't need to worry about. Now let's look at the impact of another important header called XAPI version. This header defines the version of the endpoint that you want to work with, because each version of OneView has a corresponding API version. And by the way, the numbers are not the same, meaning the current version of OneView is 5.2, actually 5.3 now, since we just released that. But the API version of it is not 5.2. But you have a mapping that can be seen on the first page of the online help, which is also on the HPE Enterprise Library. I'm going to right now. And you see here the mapping. So for 5.2, which we're using in this workshop, the REST API version is 1600. 5.0, it was 1200, etc. So let's do a curl request on a resource without an XAPI version header. And the resource that was added in a somewhat recent version of OneView named the hypervisor cluster profiles. Let's run that and see what happens. What you get is a 404 error. A resource could not be found. So the first reflex of a programmer when getting a 404 is looking for a typo, because maybe you named the resource wrong. It's not named hypervisor cluster profiles, or the dash are not there, or there's no S, or something like that. But in fact, that's not the problem here. The problem is that without the XAPI version header in the request, OneView assumed that you wanted to work with the oldest version of the API it could support. And in that oldest version of the API, this resource, hypervisor cluster profiles, did not exist. So that's why OneView is returning a 404 error, just because you're missing the XAPI version header. So if we do the same request, exactly the same request, the same spelling for hypervisor cluster profile, but we add -h XAPI version colon 1600. Now you don't get the 404 error, you get success. You get, in fact, an empty list because I don't have any hypervisor cluster profile defined in this appliance, but you don't get an error. So forgetting this version header is one of the most common mistakes when you're using the OneView API without a helper library. And it can cause some head scratching because you might have some odd behavior sometimes. So just remember, if you're not using a library that handles this header for you, just remember to include it all the time and include it with the proper version number, depending on what you're programming against. So now let's get to use the API a little more. What we want to do is provision a new server. Let's assume you have a cluster of servers already running, but you want an additional one because your business application is running low on capacity or for whatever reason. So first, let's look at the server we have in the environment with get HPE server. That gives you a fairly long list with the name of the server, its status, its power state. They are all powered off here, its serial number, the model, so Synergy 480 Gen 10 here, Synergy 660 Gen 9, and the version of the ROM BIOS. So this default output does not tell us if a server has a profile assigned to it, but in fact, it doesn't show all the data. It shows only some default data that was chosen by the programmer of the library, but we can look at all the properties, all the data if we want to, by piping get HPE server into get member. That gives you the full list of properties that a server object has in OneView. And in particular, if we want to see if a particular server has a profile assigned to it, you would look at this property here, server profile URI. If that property value is null, then there is no server profile assigned to that server. And if it's not null, if it's a URI of a server profile, then that's the URI of the server profile assigned to the server. So if we wanted to see which server have no server profile assigned to it, we could do a get HPE server pipe where object to filter the list, and this little expression, exclamation mark, which is the negation in PowerShell, $_, which is the object on which we are iterating, dot server profile URI. So that means get me the list of server where the server profile URI property is null. I can execute that. I will get, in fact, the same list pretty much, and unless some of you are already ahead of me and have already started creating a server profile. And in fact, once you are more advanced in the OneView PowerShell library, you will see that there is an option just for that in the get HPE server commandlet. So get HPE server dash no profile will return the list of servers that have no profile assigned to it. So it's fair to assume that all of these servers that have no profile assigned are available to provision a new server. So we want to create a new server profile and assign it to one of these servers. For that, we have server profile templates that have been created already outside of this workshop. And I'm getting the list with get HPE server profile template. And we are going to use in particular the ones that start with templates. So these ones here. And there are different templates for different server hardware types, depending on if it's a 480 or 660, and depending on the mezzanine cards inside the server, you have a different server hardware type and a different template for it. So each of you has been assigned one server, one available server. So the one I will be using is named Synergy Inc. 1B5, and all of you following on your own will have a different server here. That's normal, so that we don't step on each other's toes. And this server, my server here, has server hardware type SY480J91, and I'm going to create a server profile based on the template named template for 480Gen91. And these 3 lines of code are going to do just that. So first, I get the server I want, and I store it into a $server variable. Second, I get the server profile template I want, again from the name, and I store that into a $SPT variable. And then finally, I use the new HPE server profile commandlet. I pass it a name for my new server profile, and I pass it the server profile template I just retrieved and the server hardware I just retrieved. So let's execute that. So that's going to run for a couple of minutes to actually create the server profile. And while it does, I'm going to switch to the GUI. And I'm going to see here the profile being created. And I see a profile of student 217 who is already finished creating. So congratulations, 217, you're ahead of me. But while my profile is being created, I can expand the gray banner to see all the steps that are being performed by this creation. So it's reserving resources, connections, configuring the connections, configuring the SAN storage, and then finally applying the server hardware settings. So that's where it would apply BIOS settings, boot settings, smart array configuration settings, things like that. These are all parts of the server hardware settings applied. And it's completed. It was fairly quick. If I go back to my Jupyter environment, I will see my PowerShell kernel is back to idle. So the display is fairly ugly. That's actually a new feature of the OneView library 5.2, where the function that waits for the completion of a task, of an asynchronous task, is displaying progress for all the tasks and all of the subtasks that are created. So you see configuring connections, creating the boot volume, things like that. This is a progress bar being displayed, but in Jupyter, it looks fairly ugly. It looks good, like real progress bar in an interactive environment, but not so much in Jupyter. Anyway, the task was completed. If I go back to the end, there you go, task completed 100% and successfully. So now we can look in detail at the server profile we just created with HPE server profile, name the name of the profile, pipe select star in order to look at all the properties and not just the default output from the library. And you see all the properties in the server profile, most of which come from the server profile template. So you see the boot mode, the boot settings, management processor, that's the ILO, local storage, SAN storage, OS deployment settings if we are using image streamer. All that is part of the server profile and it's coming from the server profile template. We can also do, for example, a command like that with a pipe. It's always very useful to pipe stuff in PowerShell. So here I'm getting the HPE server hardware type named SY480Gen91, and I'm piping that into get HPE server with the no profile option. That means I'm going to get the list of servers of that particular server hardware type, and filter that list to just the servers that do not have a profile assigned already. And I get a list of 4 servers. So Synergy Inc. 2 B5, Synergy Inc. 3 B5, and then some in Synergy Inc. 5. And the one that's missing is the one I used actually, Synergy Inc. 1 B5. And it's also that same server hardware type, but it has a server profile assigned, the one I just created. So that's why it's not showing up in that list. So the PowerShell OneView library has commandlets for just about everything in the REST API, but there are a few cases that are not covered by a commandlet. And for those cases, you can still use the library, but use a generic function send HPOV request and pass it the URI you want that starts with a /rest/something. So for example, one such example is the list of active user sessions on the appliance. And the URI for that is /rest/active user sessions. And I can run that. By default, it's going to do a get on that URI. And that gives me a list of apparently 4 members. And you see the IP address. So you will see the username is administrator, since we're all using the same username. The appliance connection is also the same, since we are all actually the client host, I should say. That's the client host. So you will see 2. One is our Jupyter Hub server, and the other one is probably my system. In a real production environment where you have connections coming from different administrator workstations and using different accounts, not just everybody on the administrator account, this would be more useful to see who is connected on the appliance. And now to finish up, just to clean up, we are going to remove the server profile we just created with remove HPOV server profile. And then finally, it's always good practice to finish the session cleanly by issuing a disconnect so that we release any memory you might be using in the appliance. And that concludes the first part of this workshop. So you see here profile student 2.1 being deleted. And student 2.17 should also delete their profile, otherwise you won't be able to do the second part of the workshop where we'll be using Python to create another profile for the same server. I'll pause for just a second in case there are any questions. If you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself or post it in the chat. Frédéric or Patrick, did you see any question?
Sorry, no question.
Okay.
So let's. Okay? Yeah. Could you do some reaction or in the chat? Yeah. Okay, but you can continue. It seems okay.
Okay, let's go on. So now we're going to move to Python. So if you can open that second notebook here, the ones that start with 2. That's our Python notebook. As you can see here, it uses Python 3 compared to our previous notebook, which was using PowerShell. So first, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the Python library for OneView comes in 2 flavors, and I put links in the notebook here to both flavors. They are both on GitHub. So if I click here on OneView Python, I'm going to github.com, Hewlett-Packard OneView Python. That's the new one. But there was before also Python-HPE OneView. So you see the name is subtly different. And this one is in fact old and deprecated. So that's no longer being developed. It's showing here deprecated, no longer actively maintained. So you should not be using that for any recent version of OneView. So just a word of warning, if you're just searching GitHub for OneView and Python, you might be landing on the wrong one. So the right one is this one, OneView-Python. So the way to use it, pretty similarly to what we did in PowerShell with import module, we're going to import the OneView Python library with this statement here from HPE OneView.OneView client, import OneView client. And we're also importing this module pprint, stands for pretty print, which will help us display JSON data in a somewhat user-readable format. And then we build a dictionary in Python with the information needed to connect to our appliance. So it's called config. And we have the IP name with the value, the IP address of our appliance, and credentials, which is made of username, administrator, and password. And once, so I need to run that. Don't forget to run it. And then we construct the OneView client object by passing this config dictionary to the OneView client we imported here. That gives no display, that's normal. Then to make sure we are indeed connected, we can get a list of server hardware. So just like we did get HPE server hardware in PowerShell, we do OneView client.server hardware, and we do a pretty print of get all of that object. That's going to display the list of server hardware managed by this appliance. Unlike PowerShell, the PowerShell library is making efforts to make a fairly human-readable display by filtering the list of properties and displaying only what is estimated important in the properties of a server hardware. Here, it's displaying everything. This is just JSON data imprinted in its entirety. So you'll see a fairly long list since we have quite a few servers, and for each server we have a bunch of parameters. I'm not going to scroll through everything here. If you go to the left, when this blue bar appears and you click on it, that's going to collapse the entire cell output. So this JSON, it's good for programming. It's not so good for human readability. If we want to limit a little bit the display, we can, instead of doing a get all on server hardwares, we can do a get by name, passing the name of the server we are allocated. So I'm using Synergy Inc. 1 just like in PowerShell. If I run that cell, I get still JSON data with a lot of properties, but for a single server instead of the 30 or 40 servers we have in this environment. And of course, I still need to pretty print that data. And you see everything relevant to that server. So for example, MP firmware version here is the version of the ILO firmware. MP host info, that's the IP addresses of the ILO here. It's an ILO 4, since this is a Gen 9 server. The name of the server is part number and the port map. So all the mezzanine cards that are inside the server. So here we have a smart array controller. And we should have, yes, here a CNA, Synergy 3820C. For which we have physical ports and the MAC addresses and worldwide name of each of these ports, etc. Also have some information about the hardware itself, like the processor core count, processor speed, processor type, etc. Lots of data, as you can see. One useful thing is in Python, you can use the help function on pretty much anything. So you pass it that server object we just retrieved, and you get the list of methods that can be used on this particular server. So if you get all firmwares, get a report of firmwares on the servers, remove or add would be for rack servers. So here we're using Synergy, so that would not be applicable. And a bunch of get functions, get BIOS, get ILO SSO URL to connect to the ILO directly, etc. So fairly long list of methods that can be used on this particular object. So now let's say we want to create a server profile just like we did in PowerShell. So the principle is fairly similar to PowerShell. So we need to get the server and the server profile template. So let's first get the template, OneView client. That's our connection to the OneView appliance. Dot server profile templates, dot get by name, and the name of the template we want to use. And then we do a profile equal TMPL, the template object we just retrieved, dot get new profile. So what this does, in fact, is does not create a new profile on the appliance, but it creates a new profile object in your Python interpreter's memory. So at this point, the profile object is just local. You have not passed it back to the OneView appliance yet. And before we do that, we need to modify two properties in the profile object, at least two properties. One is the name. So profile name, I give my profile student to one name, and profile server hardware URI, and I give that the URI of my server object I retrieved previously. So that means I want to create a profile named the profile student 201, and I want to assign it to the server hardware represented by this URI. That's still executed only in the memory of my local interpreter. And now it's this call here, new profile equal OneView client server profiles dot create, and I pass it the profile object I just constructed. Is that call that is going to go back to the OneView appliance and actually create the profile. I run it, and I switch back to my OneView GUI, and I should see profile student 201 being recreated again. So just the same way as we had in PowerShell. I can click the gray banner and see the various steps that are being performed in the creation of the server profile, reserving resources, configuring resources, all the same thing. It's the same code that is being made in the backend, so it doesn't matter whether it's coming from PowerShell or Python. It's still the same code in the backend. And once that is complete, I will do the same, delete the profile, and disconnect the session to the OneView appliance just to free up resources. I'm going to wait until the creation is complete. Before that's done, yeah, here, that's finished. Create completed in just under 1 minute. So now I can go ahead and delete the profile. I can check that the profile is being deleted. You see the little running circle, meaning there's a task being performed on that object. And we should see the object disappear fairly quickly. There we go, done. Go back to Jupyter, see new profile.delete return true. And finally, we disconnect our session by calling OneView client.connection.logout. And that's the end of the workshop. So please take a moment to fill out your survey and feel free to join the community by signing up to the HPE Dev newsletter.